Passing is morally neutral. Like, it doesn't make you a
Yeah.
better trans person to pass as the gender that you are, but it's also not a bad thing to want that. Like, why would people not want to just be respected as the gender they are? I get that. So I'm not here like to tell trans people, stop wishing you could pass because you're just upholding patriarchal values. Like, if you want to pass, that's fine. I just want people to know that passing is not within your control sometimes, That's what I mean by it's context specific.
Hello and welcome to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. We get curious about all things gender, sex and sexuality, as well as relationships, feminism, the inclusive kind, mental health and kink, and all that makes us humans unique and diverse. From body positivity to body dysmorphia, it's all welcome here. If you like what we do and want to make a contribution, you can become a patron on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/50 Shades of Gender or buy us a coffee. Links are on the website. Now join us on a journey of inclusion, acceptance and respect. I'm your host, Esther Lemons. I am a cis queer woman and my pronouns are she and her. In this episode, I have a conversation with Renée Yoxon, a singer, songwriter and gender-affirming voice teacher. Renée's pronouns are they and them, and they are non-binary trans. They also identify as maverique and, back in the day, genderqueer. Find out what that means to Renée in this episode. We also talk about being who you are right now, bridging the trans and cis experience, how passing is morally neutral, internal versus societal perception of gender, simultaneously upholding and tearing down gender binaries, and how the voice is more nurture than nature. To clarify some terminology that is used in the episode, BIPOC is Black, Indigenous and People of Colour. It was recorded on the 29th of November 2021. Now let's get into the episode. Hello and welcome. What's your name?
My name is Renée Yoxon.
Hello, Renée. And let's talk about your gender experience. What labels do you use?
So primarily I use trans and non-binary. I often say I'm a non-binary person, or I'm non-binary trans, or I'm trans. But just those usually when I'm talking to people. But for the purpose of this show, I also use the label maverique to describe my particular flavor of non-binary.
Cool. I like the word flavor there, actually. Yeah, I'm intrigued by it. As I mentioned, like there's been one other person, Jay, who uses that label. But I did find it very, I tried to get my head around it at the time, and I did struggle, I must admit. But let's start at the, beginning. Let's start with trans and non-binary. What do those mean to you?
Well, I don't think I can talk about non-binary without talking about maverique, but I'll talk about trans first. Yeah. So, cool. To me, being trans is just like not identifying with the gender I was assigned at birth. And that's it. So, but not everybody, of course, is going to agree with that. But for me personally, I'm trans because I had to transition socially. Although people don't need to transition in order to be trans either. Just for me, that's how I came to identify as trans. Because for a while, I didn't identify as trans. I only identified as non-binary, and I didn't see myself in the label of trans. And it took me like a little bit of time to start to see myself in that term. But now I do.
Yeah, interesting. So you came to the, conclusion, let's call it conclusion, the conclusion of non-binary before you came to not the same understanding, a similar...
I guess I actually have to go back further in time. Let's go on the journey. So I always had some like difficulties with gender, I would say. Like, I remember being a teenager and just like having feelings. I don't really know what those feelings were, but just like I didn't fit in. I wasn't like other girls, I think that's a very common non-binary experience. And then I got to university and there was like the first LGBT group that I was ever exposed to was at my university in Ottawa. And there I met a bunch of cool trans people and also my current, one of my best friends in the world. And genderqueer was like the term du jour. We didn't have non-binary because this was back in 2005 or 6 at the time, So I started identifying at that time as a genderqueer woman, like a woman who had boy days, and that was like normal within normal within the group that I ran with. Like I had a cool group of polyamorous lesbians that I would hang out with, and gender fucking is like really normal in those circles. So that was where I started. And then in about 2012, I would say I got on Tumblr. This is also a very common non-binary experience to be on Tumblr. And there I learned like a little bit more detail about gender, and I started to like use the anonymity of Tumblr as a place to like safely experiment with different labels. So then I started calling myself a demigirl, which maybe I don't know if you're familiar with that term. Yeah. A demigirl, for your audience, is just like someone who's mostly woman, but some part not, I guess.
Yeah,
And
girl
that was
adjacent.
like girl adjacent. Yeah. So I was like, that was a safe way to like experiment with non-binariness. And then I was a they, she for a while. And then after a while, it just was like, okay, I'm non-binary and I use they pronouns. And it was like Tumblr that allowed me to sit with that long enough to feel good about that. And it was also on Tumblr that I learned about the term maverique, because it was coined by Vesper, who was like an asexual non-binary activist from Tumblr. And they were really active at that time. I think they're still active, but they coined the term maverique. And I was like, that is why none of these other terms fit me exactly, because this uncoined term, this newly coined term, is the thing that works for me.
Yeah. Wow.
And then after all that, then I started calling myself trans.
Yeah. So how did the evolution into trans, how did you get there? I'm curious.
I mean, like, the way people define trans and the, I don't want to say gatekeeping, but like who we allow to be trans has evolved over the years. And there was a time when you were only trans if you transitioned medically. As of course, that was never the case, but that was what was like the popular idea around transness. And so now it's a lot easier to identify as trans without feeling like you're occupying space that doesn't belong to you, I think. So back in the day when I was identifying as non-binary and I was still like passing as a woman, I mean, I still do pass as a woman, I think, for most people, except for those who have keen vision. I think at that time I just felt like I was occupying territory that didn't belong to me. So after a while, I started to see myself in the experience of other trans people that I would meet. And then I was like, oh, I'm obviously trans. I'm having all these same experiences as these other trans people, so I'm trans too. Even though I haven't done any like medical transitioning of any sort. Yeah.
That's fair enough. Your journey, your decisions. So, I'd love to talk a bit more about the maverick, actually. So what you said in your, the things you sent me, you say you don't really identify as maverick or that you are maverick, but the word itself does describe your gender. So can you talk a bit more about that? Because I'm still confused about it.
Sure, no problem. So I'm nothing if not a pragmatic person, I would say. And I really respect people who are like extremely radical and who are pushing boundaries and deliberately, what's the word I'm looking for? Shaking things up and destabilizing like cultural norms. But I don't think that's my place in the cultural context. Like I think my job is more to be a bridge between trans experience and cis experience, because I don't know. I have trouble talking about this because this is like really rooted in whiteness also, like, and also the way that I express my gender is like very palatable to cis people. And I struggle with that. I both like see that and I understand the privilege inherent with that, but I don't love it. Let's say, I think I'd rather be more radical, but this is who I am right now. And so I recognize that I can easily help cis people understand like what it is to be trans because they'll listen to me. So that's wrapped up in all my privilege. I forget how I got here. What was the original question? It was about maverick.
We just wondered about the maverick label, but it's all that's so interesting because I feel like even though I consider myself like a queer person, I'm also quite cis passing, and like I'm not saying that I feel like I'm not cis. I'm not trans. But I'm not. Am I cis though? Do you know what I mean? It's all like it's all these questions.
I mean, that's a really trans thought, just so you know.
Yeah,
not many cis people ask that question. Okay, I remember what I was saying. Though. I remember what I was saying. So I'm a very pragmatic person, and like for me, I think non-binary as a term is becoming more and more accepted. It's far from fully accepted, but it's much more common for like a cis person to have heard of the word non-binary, to have met non-binary people, to understand how to use they, them pronouns. So I'm not running around calling myself maverick in cis circles because I understand that it will just lead to a conversation that I don't really want to be having, nor do I think it's necessary to be having. Like not every person needs to know the minutia of my gender. It's not relevant to to our interaction, and that's like a normal part of being trans and cis. Like we don't tell every single person everything about ourselves. So
Yeah.
I identify as maverick. I have since 2012. I would maybe use it adjectively, like I'm a maverick person, or my gender is described as maverick. I don't know. But in like this situation in which someone is explicitly asking me about the minutia of my gender, I'm happy to say, hello, proudly maverick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you want to know what I think of when I think of the word maverick, or
please.
Would you like me to go into more detail?
Sure. Yeah.
So Vesper's definition was a gender that is neither male nor female, but not neutral and not apathetic of gender, right? So like I think people think of non-binary gender as either being like a combination of both, or neutral, or agender, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this is like I have a strong internal sense of gender, but it is something unrelated to the gender binary. And the things that make up my gender are unrelated to masculinity or femininity. I don't identify as trans-masculine or trans-feminine. I wouldn't. But yeah, I just identify as me, as my gender. And I think there are other words for this too, like aporagender, I think is another word that like is the same definition, but I like maverick better. Personally.
Yeah, I'll have to look it up on the LGBTA wiki, which I turn to a lot these days. Yeah. So I just got a sense of like maverick being, well, although all gender identities, I suppose, are unique to the individual, I just got a sense that maverick is like a really individual thing. So it's not really easily defined. It just applies to who uses it. I'm not sure that even makes sense, but I'm just processing it on the spot here. But I feel like I just got a sense of something when I have to try and put it into words, which I'm not sure I'm succeeding at, but yeah.
Non-binary, I think some people think of me as like just a neutral person, or they understand the concept of not relating to gender at all. But I feel full of gender, but I don't feel like you've heard the term gender fuck, which is like, high levels of both masculinity and femininity. I don't feel like that either. I don't really possess like a gender fuck presentation. I don't think of myself as neutral. I don't think of myself as agender. But I have a strong sense of gender, but it's just not related to the gender binary, which I know is very challenging for some people to understand, which is why I don't talk about it very much.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. Also, I was just wondering about the term genderqueer and what that means to you.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really think about genderqueer anymore because I did identify that way back in the day in my early 20s, but I'm 34 now almost, and it's not a word I use all the time. So for me, like non-binary and genderqueer were interchangeable. I think at the time when I identified as genderqueer, it was just like a way of stating that I didn't understand or jive with cis womanhood 100%. But again, that term is used like in so many different ways to describe a variety of experiences. But for me, it was just, I feel a little different.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm thinking about now is just the flawedness in labels. And it's like they can be useful for trying to describe your experience, but like they're also very elusive. Like, how do you find a word or a term that describes your experience? Like, it's like impossible, really, isn't it?
Well, and I think the big problem with labels is that they are often generated from an experience that is dominant in culture, like that is hegemonically the dominant experience, So like a lot of people who are marginalized are not going to jive with our conceptions culturally of cis womanhood, for example. So you don't need to be trans. You could be black. You could be disabled. You could be all these other ways of being marginalized and find yourself like not getting down with cis womanhood. And that was one of my experiences too. I'm white, however, but I am disabled. That's why I use a rollator and a cane. I have chronic pain essentially. So my experience of gender is a different one just by virtue of being disabled, because people interact with me in a way that is different from how they would interact with an able-bodied cis woman, So I'm not experiencing all the trappings of cis womanhood that an able-bodied woman would experience, So I think that helped me in a way of coming to terms with my gender, because I was like, well, I'm not getting what people get when they are cis. So I might as well just really dig into what I actually am and identify that way. But yeah, I mean, we're getting pretty philosophical now, but I think this is like the big
cool.
problem with labels in general.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Like you were saying about how being disabled is obviously part of your identity. It's part of who you are. And I always find it interesting how all these facets of people combine to make the whole, but also how they're connected, how they're linked,
Totally.
So yeah, can you say a bit more about how you feel your gender and your disability are linked together?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a clear answer for you there. It's something I just sort of mull over from time to time. But when I'm walking through a place with my rollator, I don't know if someone is giving me a particular look because they're reading me as disabled or because they're reading me as trans, depending on what I'm wearing that day, And I can either walk without my mobility aids or with them. So I get to decide, like, what do I want to be most prominently featured today? My gender or my disability? And it's also something that I end up having to, like, decide what I want to be accommodated for. So when I was in school, I frequently had to, at the beginning of a new class, be like, do I want to talk to this teacher about getting my accommodations met or getting my pronouns respected? And I didn't want to have both because you feel like too much, it's like, hi, I'm all these different things that you don't know. And I have to teach you all these things and then hope that you will respect me enough to understand two things at once. Like, it feels like too much for people when really it's just another way of being,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. It's interesting. I was just thinking of an example, which is obviously not at all related to gender and is also coated in privilege, obviously. But when I was a kid, I had glasses, like I had really thick jam jar glasses. And then I needed braces because I had an overbite. And I just remember thinking, okay, I'm not doing both. I'm not doing both. One of these two is going to go. I'm just going to dedicate myself to one of them, but I'm not doing both. Because it wasn't just about me, like, I'm thinking about maybe not communicating it to other people, but like the way you then present to other people. It does affect how people respond to you, doesn't it? Like, if someone has, I don't know, physical appearance in so many ways affects how people...
It just speaks to people's, like, to your reticence to deviate from the norm in more than one way. It's like, oh, if I'm deviating from the norm in one way, that's one thing. Like, I can maybe expect to be respected if I only have one thing that makes me weird. But if I have two things that make me weird, then that's unacceptable. And that kind of thought is just is just like a patriarchal...
Totally.
It's a thought that is, like, implanted in our brains. It's not one that any person would be born with,
Totally. And for me, I was bullied as a kid quite a bit, and I felt like I did not want to attract any attention to myself. I just kind of wanted to be invisible. So I thought the more of this there is, the more different I am, the more I'm going to be noticed, and it was something I did not want. And then when you grow up and you have to, get out in the world, and especially if you do your own thing with business and stuff, you have to unlearn all that crap and then thinking, oh yeah, visibility, that's a real thing. That's a real issue I have here. I wonder what's behind that. So that's interesting, isn't it? God. Yeah.
Yeah, and you have to really respect someone who is already marginalized who then decides to come out as trans, because it's a harder decision if you're already finding yourself in a marginalized position to then put yourself in a further marginalized position. I don't know. I've been doing a teacher training program for my work, which we will get into, I'm sure, at some point. And I realized that there was not enough representation of trans people of color in the program that I was doing. So I conducted 6 interviews with BIPOC trans people just to learn more for myself, but also to make sure the teachers I was training don't leave without, like, a good perspective of what it is to be both Black and trans, or of color and trans, or Indigenous and trans. And that was, like, the big take home. It was like, it's a lot more work to be yourself when you are already marginalized.
Yeah. Well, since you refer to your work, it's a good subject to talk about next, because you work with voice, right? So I'm on your website right now, and what I can see is, hi, I'm Renée. I teach trans people to love their voice, and I think that's just a really lovely. That's just a really lovely way to phrase it, I suppose. It's so short and concise, and it's also very I know what the word is, like affirming, accepting of yourself. Because a lot of the time, I guess trans women are told they have to, present a certain way and they have to pass, quote unquote, which is a horrible term. So do you work with people in a way that, I don't know, do you help them discover their own voice, I suppose, don't you?
Yeah, this is complicated. So let's dig into this. Okay.
Let's dig.
So there's lots of terms to describe the work that I do. I usually leave it up to the student to name the work, because for each student it's individual. I have been known to call it trans voice alteration, trans voice work, gender affirming voice lessons or training, voice feminization, masculinization, neutralization, trans vocal exploration. There's lots of ways to call this work. So when you're talking about presentation of gender, there are like two facets that you kind of have to consider, right? There's the facet that is within you. So like, what brings me gender euphoria? What is going to make me happy when I put it on my body or when I use it to express myself? And then the other facet is, what will people see and perceive? Right? So you're working with like both your internal perception of gender and then the societal perception of your gender. And the problem with the societal perception of your gender is it could be as accepting as your perception of gender if you're fortunate enough to be around a group of people who also see gender in the same way that you do and who understand you and the nuance of your gender. But more than likely, you're going to be around people who think of gender as a binary: man, woman, feminine, masculine, whatever, right? So you have to understand that however you choose to present your gender, it's going to be filtered through the societal lens of femininity and masculinity. And so you kind of have to, this is unfortunate, but you have to make the decision, like, how do I want to be read if I'm going to have to be read through that lens? And what will also make me happy? So there's these two facets you have to consider when presenting gender, which sucks. I'm not going to lie. It's like not great, but it is just the reality we live in. Again, I'm very pragmatic as a person. So what I say my work is I want people to not focus on passing as a goal, even though obviously passing is like important for safety. And it's a fine thing to want. Like, I get wanting to have an easy life where you don't have to describe your experience of transness all the time. That's fine. But I find when people put passing as their goal for their voice, it's so context specific that it's like almost just a moving goalpost that you can never figure out where it actually is. So I'd rather people use gender euphoria as their guiding as their guiding goal. Like, do I feel good about this gender? Is my internal sense of gender lit up by the voice that I'm creating? So all this to say, my job is to help people understand what abilities their voice already possesses, how they use their voice to express themselves currently, and how to use those tools that they already have to make a gendered voice that gives them gender euphoria, and that maybe also allows them to be perceived within the lens of femininity and masculinity in which they wish to be perceived, right? So we are frequently feminizing or masculinizing the voice along the lens of like gender, but the gender binary, right? But that's because that's the world we live in. So we kind of have to do that anyway, you know? So there you go. That was a long way around, but we made it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And part of me was thinking, like, because I've obviously heard of the term passing, and it doesn't sit well with me, because I feel like people shouldn't have to pass. They shouldn't have to worry about that. But like you say, society is what it is. And it's not that maybe people feel they should, but it's how they feel most comfortable and safe. And there's all these different facets to it. And that's a really good thing to, remember. Yeah.
I try and approach a lot of these topics with like a morally neutral stance. Like, passing is morally neutral. Like, it doesn't make you a better trans person to pass as the gender that you are, but it's also not a bad thing to want that. Like, why would people not want to just be respected as the gender they are? I get that. So I'm not here like to tell trans people, stop wishing you could pass because you're just upholding patriarchal values. Like, if you want to pass, that's fine. I just want people to know that passing is not within your control sometimes, That's what I mean by it's context specific. Like, in some contexts, you might pass as the gender that you are, and then in others you don't. And it really just depends on like how much effort you put into your presentation that day. And that's why passing is ridiculous, because it's so dependent on like all these factors.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, if someone approaches you saying they want to pass, and you can tell from their voice that that might not be a possibility to the degree that they desire, how do you work with people?
That's not something I can tell right away, right? Like, because
that develops as you go. Like,
first of all, I don't know what someone's going to be wearing when they speak. Like, you can never tell someone, oh yeah, totally. This voice you can pass and this one you can't. Like, the thing I say all the time in all my workshops is, I am not the gender police. Like, I'm not here to say, yep, you have a woman's voice now, congratulations. Like,
here's your certificate.
Exactly. Like, I believe that if you're a woman, you have a woman's voice. If you would like a voice that is different from that for reasons, great. I can help you get that. If you're a man, you have a man's voice. And if you want to modify that voice to be different, I'm also happy to help you with that. Like, I really do have to walk the line of, like, helping to uphold the gender binary and also tearing it down as a non-binary person. It's challenging. Wow. Every day is my challenge,
Yeah. That is so interesting. Like, being in those, like, having both these really opposing situations, I suppose, and letting them both be there, because neither of them are wrong or right. Is that
correct?
Yeah. That's so interesting. Wow. Ooh.
I just want people to have freedom with their voice and to not feel restricted by what they currently have. Like, I want people to, I think people tend to think that the voice is this innate, intrinsic part of ourselves. And if we change the voice, then we're faking it, or we're fabricating things, or we're deceiving people. And it's all ridiculous. Like, you have an accent and I have an accent. But if you were born here and I was born there, we would have the opposite accents if nothing else were different, you know? So your voice is just, it's nurture. It's not nature, you know? It's how you are habituated in childhood. And as you grow, you could will rehabituate your voice. Like, if you happen to go through a testosterone puberty, you have to relearn how to use your instrument and how to talk again. And then if you decide as an adult you want to rehabituate it again, that's not fake. That's just a choice that you made consciously. And it doesn't mean it's any different from the voice you currently have. It's just another facet of the voice that you're able to do, you know? So
that's such a good point, actually. Like, voice being nurture, not nature. Yeah. Because, I mean, that when it comes to voice, and especially if you're marginalized or a minority group, obviously you're not encouraged to use your voice. You get, oppression is a thing. So, using your voice. I mean, as a woman-ish, I'm still figuring that one out.
Sure.
But, like, it is my experience, and has been my experience for most of my life. So it's not that I completely detach myself from that term. But, like, I've had certain experiences where, or like a lot of experiences, I guess, that I'm only now seeing for what they are, which involves, like, no, don't speak up. Be silent, be quiet. Yeah, don't take up too much space, in all sorts of ways. So what is your best tip for embracing the power of your own voice, whatever gender you are?
Well, this is like the metaphorical use of the word voice. And I haven't really explored this too much. Like, I think going into 2022, it might be something that I think of more in terms of how I don't want to say market. I don't really like that word, but how I like share what I have with the world. Like, I haven't leaned heavily on the like raise your trans voice messaging. So I don't have an answer for that. I think
interesting. Yeah.
My goal is just for trans people to be happy. Like, if I had one business goal, like the one thing in my business plan that is like that upholds my values is trans joy is the end game. So I don't want to pressure trans people to speak up or to like teach people I just want them to be happy. And if that means pouring a cup of tea and sitting alone and not talking to anybody, like, great.
Totally. Yeah. So, it is totally up to people whether they want to use their voice and how they want to use their voice, right? I do feel like I have a sense in myself that I feel like it's probably a reaction to like conditioning and upbringing and stuff. But I'm like, damn right, I'm ready to use my fucking voice. Do you know what I mean? That's where I'm at.
And so that's I'm like, yes. You. Like, that's you're a podcaster. Like, obviously you want to use your voice, but I meet so many people who, they don't feel like they have a right to modify their voice because, like I was saying earlier, they feel like it's deceptive or they feel like they're faking things. And it's like, my goal is just to tell people, do whatever the fuck you want. If you want to change your makeup, change your makeup. If you want to change your clothes, change your clothes. If you want to change your voice, that is also something that you can modify, just like you can modify other parts of your gender presentation.
Yeah.
Right? But
I'm not so good to remember. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not here to tell people that they need to educate on trans rights, that they need to educate the people in their own family, you know, that they need to stand up and for themselves. Like that to me is asking more of trans people than I actually want to ask of them. Like I'm in service of trans people. I don't want them to have to also be in service of themselves. You know what I mean? Like some of them will as they go and do their lives, but my only goal is to make trans people as happy as possible in their lives. That's it. So hug a trans woman today.
Yeah. Just trying to think where to take it next.
That was a weird answer to your question. Sorry. It's like,
but
that's how I feel.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting because, like, I'm now starting to think about using the voice and how it's not something we're just born with and stuck with. Basically, it's something that is fluid and adaptable and. Yeah.
Well, think about it in your own life. Like, how many different ways do you currently use your voice? Like, do you have a pet? I don't know.
Oh.
I'm serious. Yeah. Like, how do you speak to your pet versus how do you speak on your podcast?
When I talk to cats, I'm very, I don't know, I guess it's how some people speak to small children or babies.
Exactly.
Which is, sometimes I observe that and I'm like, really? But then I do it myself to a cat. You know, that's how it is.
And that is another way that you're able to use your voice. So by the same token, if you wanted to speak like that all the time, you could, ostensibly.
Yeah. It's interesting because I guess it's like the object of who you're speaking to affects how you use your voice. That's an interesting realization.
And how much energy you have, and if you're sick or if you're excited or if you're anxious or if you're scared or if you're tired, you know, all these ways that your body can be affects your voice. The voice is like a really good indicator, like a litmus test for the rest of your body, you know. If you're fatigued, you hear it in your voice. If you're excited, you hear it in your voice. If you're anxious, you hear it in the voice. So that's like one aspect of it. And then there's also the thing of being able to modify the voice to express different things, like unrelated to how your body is feeling. So when you talk to your boss or your pet or your best friend, like those are all different modalities of speech. So it's already a very flexible thing. People just don't see it sometimes.
Yeah, it's interesting when you start becoming aware of the subtleties of it, I find, because I think I can observe it in my language, and I still do it a little bit, but especially in the earlier episodes of the podcast, I'm almost like I sound apologetic, almost like, you know, I almost even using that word, and I ask questions. I'm like, oh, sort of this, and are you kind of that, and you know, it's all this like. Yeah, almost apologizing for, you know, taking up space and stuff. It's really interesting that the subtleties and the nuances that shows up as. You know?
I would call it deferential instead of apologetic, which I think is like a polite,
that's a better word.
Way of saying that.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, maybe it just needs reframing in myself as well, because I obviously judge it as something like, what am I doing here? Oh my goodness, all the oppression. You know?
Well, you're working hard to accommodate a variety of languages. So deference is necessary if you want people to trust you and to keep coming on your podcast.
Yeah, no, that's a good point as well. And I feel like I am navigating this space in a way that, you know, I don't know everything and I'm learning, and I'm also very conscious because I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Although I am okay and I've made peace with the fact that might happen sometimes, and then I'll have to deal with it.
I mean, it happens to me all the time, too. I've worked with hundreds of trans people just by virtue of the fact that I do these public workshops and I have my online courses. And I misgender people sometimes. It happens, you know. I think the main thing is just not to put it on that person to, like, help you atone for your wrongdoing. Just be like, whoops, sorry, and you know, fix it.
Moving on. Yeah. And that's an interesting one, because obviously when you're talking about someone, they might not be present. They might not be in the same space.
Oh, no, in my case, they're always present because I'm working with a workshop of groups, 20 people.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Oh, it's so, like, I'll give you an example. The other day I was doing my teacher training and somebody logged in, and I have really bad facial memory. Like, I swear I'm almost face blind, which is good and bad for interacting with trans people. But I really rely on the names and pronouns people put in their Zoom description, you know?
Yeah.
And somebody logged in with their dead name and like hadn't had a chance to change it yet to their current name because they use their dead name at work. And I was like, oh, hi, dead name. But I thought it was a different person than last week. I was like, you must not have been here last week. So we'll give you a chance to introduce yourself. And then he changed his name to his current name. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry.
No.
Oh no. Yeah. And it was fine, but embarrassing for me, you know.
Yeah.
Slightly embarrassing.
Yeah, it does happen. No, that makes total sense. I feel like the times when I don't speak to groups of people necessarily. So for me, it's more a matter of if I misgender someone, which happens not very often, but I'm talking usually to other people and the person in question isn't there. But I notice even then it makes me feel like, oh my God, I got this wrong. How can I get this wrong? I shouldn't get this wrong. Do you know what I mean? So
it's a transgression, so it makes sense.
It is. Yeah, totally. And I feel so conscious of it as well. But I'm also aware, like, if this happens when a person is there, I might feel even worse. But then the trick is, like, don't get stuck on it. Move on. Move the fuck on. Don't make it about me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah,
I've been working with my family a lot on this because my dad just turned 70 and my mom's in her 60s. And, you know, I came out like, oh my God, I don't know, 8 years ago or something now. And I've been to them a little less though, maybe only like 5 years. And so I've been working on the pronouns thing with them. And my brother is autistic and he is so good with the rules and with like remembering how things are supposed to be. So he lives with them and whenever they mess up, he's like, it's they, hello. And so my trick recently, I like to be kind. Like I tell them like, look, it's like when you move your cutlery from one drawer to another drawer. And then for like 3 years after you go into the wrong drawer for your spoons. Like, I get it. You called me one thing.
That is such a good analogy. Yeah. That makes so much sense. Yeah.
You know, your brain has pathways, and I get that you went down the wrong pathway for my pronoun, and you pulled out the wrong pronoun, and it's okay. I know you want to do right. I mean, not everybody needs to be this compassionate. Like, if you want to be pissed at your family, like, go ahead. I tried, and my family has made it very clear to me that they're trying. So when they make these mistakes, I try to let them go. But I started going... I started charging a $5 misgendering fee. I didn't really charge them money, but every time they would use the wrong pronoun, instead of being like, oh, that's the wrong pronoun, I would just go, $5, please. And they would go, oh, God.
That is such a good idea. I bet that it would be, that would be such a good way to rewire those neurons on at a faster pace.
Yes.
You almost just make a little noise, go ka-ching.
Exactly. I had one tweet go viral a long time ago that was like, I'm going to pay someone to come to my funeral and just blow an air horn every time one of the mourners misgenders me.
Yeah.
I think that would be really funny. But totally. So like, making a joke out of it was really good. A good way to help my family rewire their brains.
Yeah.
And the last time I visited, they did really well, I have to say. Like they're really coming along, and I didn't think it would be possible, but it just took persistence, and my family's really doing well now with that.
That's good. Yeah. That's lovely. One thing I was just wondering about is, how did you get into voice work? What was behind that?
Sure. So I have been a singer, a songwriter for many years. I have 4 albums out. I have a jazz degree and a songwriting degree. Ooh. And so, so I was like really a musician for a long time. And I stopped doing that primarily because of chronic pain. Like it just made the cost benefit analysis didn't add up, Right. And I found that I liked teaching more. Like it just lit me up in a way that performing never did, or it didn't have the same costs that performing had. So I have been teaching singing since, oh my God, over a dozen years now at least. And I'm good at it. Like I'm really good at hearing particular uses of the voice, and like structural issues and diagnosing is like a big strength of mine. So even on the phone, like I've definitely like taught lessons over the phone with no video, and I can hear like, are you clenching your abdomen? Like that was just like a little bit of a superpower of mine to hear that stuff.
Oh, wow.
So I was poised to be right for this other work, this trans voice work. And what happened was in 2018, I decided I really only wanted to teach singing lessons to trans and disabled people. And that's because other people have other teachers, but trans and disabled people only have a few people who are going to really get them. And I was one of those people. And then I thought to myself, they don't really have a lot of money historically as a group, so how am I going to teach these people? And so I created a scholarship program called the Right to Sing Award. And I raised a bunch of money, and I was able to give free singing lessons to a number of people who identified as either trans or disabled, but actually everyone identified as both. Like there's a lot of overlap in those communities, mostly because lots of people are disabled. But so I did that. And through advertising this scholarship program, there was an organization in Montreal called Project 10, who's a trans youth organization. So they service under 25-year-olds. And they contacted me and said, hey, we saw that you teach trans people. Would you be interested in doing a voice workshop for us? Because I guess they had like speech language pathologists come in, and the problem that they had with them was that they were cis and too pathologizing. So they would say things that didn't align with the values of the organization. Not that they were wrong, it just wasn't in line with how this organization wanted to be teaching their constituents. So I had never taught trans voice work, like alteration, of speech. But I was like, yes, I want to do that. That sounds so cool.
Yeah.
And so I designed my first little workshop, and it was totally different than what I have now, but it was just like an entry point. And they had me back a bunch of times. I taught it in English and in French, which is another language that I speak. And from there, I just kept learning more and doing more. And they would refer students to me. And so I kept gaining students. And then in this last year, so just in 2021, I got like a contract with another organization to do that workshop like 20 times. And so I taught it so many times in like a very short period of time. And then what happened was I made my first TikTok in May of 2021, and it went viral very quickly. Totally random. It was just like an observation that I'd had about teaching voice alteration. I've had a number of cis people approach me that wanting to like alter their voice to be more in line with their assigned gender, like having a more feminine voice or a more masculine voice, like cis men and cis women. And I thought, how
interesting.
Funny. Yeah. So I made a little TikTok about that, instant virality. And then I had so many requests for private lessons, I couldn't keep up, which was a beautiful problem to have. I was very, very thankful. So I stopped teaching entirely. Like the logical thing to do, of course, is to shut down my practice. So I shut it down, and I took like 3 months off, and I created my first e-course, Trans Vocal Exploration, which is like a 60 lesson, 10 module e-course where people can learn all about the things we've been talking about today. And that is what I do now. I continue to make e-courses, and I'm training other singing teachers who want to pivot into teaching trans voice alteration. So I've done 4 out of 5 of my lessons for this first cohort of teachers. So it's really exciting. Like I'm happier not teaching privately, because now I'm able to help like a much larger group of people in a way that I wasn't able to as a private one-on-one teacher. So it's really beautiful. I feel really grateful, to be honest.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, even being cis-ish, I'm a bit like, oh, I want to do the course. Yeah,
do the course. I mean, there's lots of people who are not identifying 100% as trans.
Yeah,
and also you don't have to identify as cis or trans. That's another binary. Just so you know that you can just be questioning.
Isn't it? Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah.
I also don't believe in the binary, non-binary. I don't believe in any binaries.
Fuck duality. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Amazing. Wow. Is there anything else you'd like to add that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, I just want people to know that if they want to get into the course, that is always available at my website, reneeyoxon.com. But if they cannot afford the course at this time, I do have a scholarship program. So if you go to my website and scroll down to the footer, you'll see my scholarship page, and you can sign up. And I give about 4 of those away a month, just based on what donations are coming in for that program. But there's lots of free resources on my TikTok as well. And I also have a free trans guide to vocal anatomy and a vocal anatomy coloring book that they can grab. And lots of free things that come out on my newsletter all the time. So please get connected with me. And my goal is to make trans people happy. So please be one of those people.
Love it. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful.
Yay. You can find out more details on the website at 50shadesofgender.com/Renée, which is RENEE, where you can also read the transcript. And you can find Renée on their website, reneeyoxon.com, which is RENEEYOXON, and on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram under @Renée Yoxon. Thank you for listening to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. You can find us online at 50shadesofgender.com, on social media, and on YouTube. Again, if you'd like to support us, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/50 Shades of Gender or buy us a coffee. Links are on the website. We hope you will listen again. Until then, stay curious and open-minded.
I have a free trans vocal guide, a guide to trans anatomy. No, let me say that again. Also, there's a siren in the background.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I also have a free, no, I can't say it. Trans guide to vocal anatomy. Yes. Okay.